Good morning. Good morning from our Egyptian temple, which just seems so appropriate, at least to start out here uh, this morning with what we're going to be launching into and talking about. I thought we should be here in our mystery school. You can see all the way up here. We're going to just have the most fantastic time today. And so I don't want to waste a moment. Let's get ourselves rocking and rolling with our Christ Mind Creed. I believe there is a divine power and presence within me which is greater than myself, and that it responds to my words and consciousness. I believe this divine presence loves me and is guiding and directing me at all times. I believe that with God all things are possible for me. I believe that my consciousness creates my reality and that I am a powerful co-creator and am not a victim of the world I see. I believe that when two or more are gathered with high intention as we are today, there is no limit to the manifestations of good which we can receive. I believe in the total healing of bodies, relationships, finances, and lives as we join in Christ consciousness. I believe that I am responsible for my own emotional journey and that I can choose peace and joy through spiritual truth. I believe that lots can happen and how is not my part. I believe that great manifestations will come from this joining today. I believe that prayer is the medium of miracles. Thank you, God. So be it. So it is. Amen. And so I invite you to close your eyes and take some gentle, deep breaths, letting all the thoughts slow down as you relax and breathe, relax and breathe. Relax the jaw, the tongue, the eyes, and the forehead. Let all the muscles of the face and head relax. And if you like, you can do some gentle head rolls just to release any tension in the neck. Breathing in, feel the heart expanding and opening to the circulation of divine love. Nice soft belly. Relaxing the buttocks as you sink down into the seat. The arms and legs growing loose and limp as all stress and tension drains away through the fingertips and the soles of the feet like sand through an hourglass. Falling back now onto that stream of golden light, the stream of well-being. Letting go, letting go, letting go. What did you come here today to release to the stream? We're going to let it all go with the exhale, so take a nice deep breath and breathe it all out. Releasing it all to the stream as it now dissolves and dissipates into nothing, to be recycled into pure positive energy. As we now rest in the divine oneness, that presence in which we live and move and have our being. the infinite invisible, knowing it is the only reality, reality with a capital R. Therefore, there is nothing to fight against or resist, nothing to fear, nothing to oppose it. For God is all there is, and all there is God. So see if you can just sense the presence of grace. Within and without, surrounding, holding you up so that you can completely surrender. Surrender to this grace, this gift of Source. Remembering this is Source. There is no other. From this, everything flows without struggle or sacrifice. It is freely given. And there is nothing for you to do but receive it. Surrender all resistance and receive the grace. Receive the gift. Let go of the future and the past, for everything is now. This holy instant. Let each breath relax you even more. As you receive now the impartations of wisdom from the still small voice. Again, taking a deep breath. As we now call this meeting, this session to order, calling in our guides, our angels, our spirit team, and all of those in the Mystic Protection Program who are not here in the live stream but who will listen or watch later, knowing there is no time and no space, just the eternal moment. We come together now in this oneness as each of us sets our intentions, beginning first with how you want to feel at the end of this session. And how do you want to feel the rest of this week, regardless of what does or doesn't happen? And you might go even deeper to see what is your soul's deepest intention in being here today. We fold all of these into our group intention, which is, as always, the healing of our minds, our restoration to joy, to sanity, to inner peace. We recognize that we have been drawn together by the power and in the presence of God. It is to God that we devote our time spent together, as well as our relationships to one another, knowing the Holy Spirit within us will so guide us in our thoughts and feelings and perceptions of all things, that we may go to sleep tonight as happier, more peaceful, and more loving beings. So be it. So it is. Amen. Oh, yes. Yes, yes, yes. So good to be here. As I said, in our Egyptian temple, as we begin, I have fully retired one entire enormous 40-year era of my life. Hopefully you've all watched the video from Saturday at Vision. This will just reaffirm some of this, but then go further. So I have ended an era and begun a new one, and we'll just call this the beginning. I'm actually going to take this video, and this will be the introduction to the next, the summer module that's starting. So there's some people who are not in this group who have signed up for that, which starts the first week of July. So I'll post this so that they can see this at the beginning, because we're going to cover some good ground here as we build this foundation for this new mystery school, right? This is the Academy of the Mystical Arts and Sciences. We'll sort of understand what that's about. You may have gotten the email that I sent last night, which had this book listed, Spiritual Science, of Emma Curtis Hopkins. And I talked a little bit about Emma Curtis Hopkins on Saturday in San Diego in that really powerhouse talk. Thank you, Colleen. And I want to talk about why I'm talking about Emma Curtis Hopkins. So I don't want to get lost here. I want to go very methodically with this. What I've really retired mostly from is being a business person and being a doer and a marketer and a this and a that. And I'm just fully in now being a mystical teacher in our secret society, the Mystic Protection Program. In that email that I sent out, there was a post from somebody who has signed up for the summer series, who was with us before but hasn't been with us for a while. And because she had left a comment on that video saying, she said, I'm coming back, I'm signing up for the summer series because it is brutal out there without the Mystic Protection Program. And so, which, was funny and true, I think. And so I had put that in the email, that we are this out in the open secret society, the Mystic Protection Program. And because it is in many ways a new beginning, I want to spend this whole summer series, which we will be going into in a few weeks, of really going over the foundation of this whole mystical, metaphysical, New Thought movement. And so in order to do that, I want to just give a little bit of the history and things that, I really have this experience now of so many of these teachers that I've talked about for years have really come into my life. I don't see them physically, and I don't necessarily even hear them, but I see in my imagination and feel the presence of Raymond Charles Barker and Ernest Holmes and Emma Curtis Hopkins, and so many of these really have been waking me up and showing me things, like directing me to things and finding out things that I can't believe that I didn't know. Things that I can't believe I didn't know this, that, or the other thing. And so I want to share it with you. And I don't know if it'll be interesting to you, but I want you to know it because my teachers were not great. I did not have good religious science teachers. I just didn't. They were not great. And so they just skipped a lot of stuff that would have been really, really helpful that I'm just finding out now. And so I'm going to be sharing all of that with all of us. And so, oh my God, there's so many delicious, wonderful things here. But let me just start with, let me pull up my outline here. It'll be very helpful to me to have something to stick with here. Because I always knew just sort of the basic outline of there was Phineas Quimby and he healed Mary Baker Eddy, and then Mary Baker Eddy started Christian Science, and then all these other people came after that. But there was a lot I didn't know or understand about the connections of it. And so I really credited Mary Baker Eddy with a lot of things that actually were not Mary Baker Eddy at all, but were Emma Curtis Hopkins. And so I want to go into that, and there's a real purpose in this. This is not just about giving you the history, but about why things unfolded the way they are and how we can now take these teachings and apply them in just fun, wonderful ways, but with an understanding more of why we're doing things the way that we do them. So in this book, The Spiritual Science of Emma Curtis Hopkins, I have had Emma Curtis Hopkins books for you. Now, you know, she's the one who coined the phrase the High Watch. So her book, High Mysticism, mentions the High Watch 1,000,001 times. And I tried so many times to read the Emma Curtis Hopkins books, and her language is just so archaic and old school that it's very hard to follow or get that much out of it. So what this book does is Ruth Miller has taken all of that and put it into modern language that's understandable, okay? But I want to read a little bit of the history of Emma Curtis Hopkins and how she is, to me, she is really the mother of New Thought and where all of this ultimately came from. So just bear with me. I'm so excited about this. Emma Curtis Hopkins is called the teacher of teachers in the New Thought movement because literally every founder of every tradition in the movement studied with her or one of her students. Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, founders of what is now called Unity, were among her first students. Ernest Holmes, founder of the Institute of Religious Science and the Centers for Spiritual Living, was her last. In between were the Brooks sisters and Melinda Kramer, founders of Divine Science, the Rick sisters, founders of the Home of Spiritual Truth Center, and hundreds of others. Hopkins was an extraordinary teacher whom all of her students loved. Let me just go through. I don't want to read. This is... I posted the link to this everywhere. It was in that email in case you want to get it as we do the new series. And you can read, this. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm reading the parts that I've outlined for us. First of all, she was healed by Mary Baker Eddy. And then she went and studied with Mary Baker Eddy. And then Mary Baker Eddy fired her ass. Really because of pettiness, because Mary Baker Eddy was very petty. She was litigious and petty and very egocentric, and she basically fired her. Emma Curtis Hopkins was writing, not the Christian Science Monitor, but their other thing that they were printing, And she actually complimented Mary Baker Eddy and saying that Mary Baker Eddy is the greatest of all the metaphysical teachers. And she got fired for that because to Mary Baker Eddy, there were no other metaphysical teachers. So the fact that she even mentioned that there were other metaphysical teachers got her fucking thrown out of Christian Science. That's how big Mary Baker Eddy's ego was, that nobody could even be mentioned except for herself as the great mother of the church. So she got thrown out. Instead, in the face of this sudden reversal, Hopkins applied the fundamental principles she'd been writing about and continued to affirm that God, the omnipotent omnipresence, is good. Therefore, I am surrounded by good and only good. So she went right to, and this is really where I am now too, is how much can I just fucking live by principle? To whatever is happening, to just come right back to principle. All right, basic classes. So she began then teaching her own classes. Well, so first of all, let's just make it clear that, and I was talking about this with the minister at Vision at CSL in San Diego over the weekend about how, and all churches are going through this, but in particular the New Thought churches are dwindling away, and having to unite more and more because there's less and less people coming. That's why Science of Mind Archives is now at Unity Village in Missouri, because that place doesn't have anything much going on there anymore. All these things that were very active are dwindling away. But this is, to me, this is the time, this is why this is so exciting, is because we are now living what all of these founders really wanted, because none of them wanted churches, except I think for Mary Baker Eddy. Their hands were basically forced by the people who were the teachers and the practitioners of, we really need a church, we really need you to, I think part of it was they were trying to get tax exemption, but also was, we need to be able to have a license to marry people, to bury them, to da-da-da-da. But Ernest Holmes didn't want a church, Charles Fillmore didn't want a church, none of these people wanted churches. What they did was they just taught lessons. They taught classes and lessons. So they had institutes, an academy. Ernest Holmes and his brother had an actual healing center in Long Beach, but none of them really wanted the fucked up organization and hierarchy of a church. And all these churches now are struggling and closing and dwindling away, and they're all basically geriatric people who are at death's door for the most part. Just dwindling away. But all of these people started out with teaching classes and doing even mail-in classes where they would send out lessons and things like that. So that's what Emma Curtis Hopkins began doing. She began doing just that, just teaching classes based on what she had learned from Christian Science. Basic classes were offered at the then outstanding fee of $50 for a series of 12 lessons. So what she did was, she took everything that she had learned from Christian Science, plus all the other things she studied. She knew many languages. She studied Hindu. She studied Egyptian philosophy. She studied all of these things, and she boiled them all down into 12 lessons. Now, I want you to pay attention to this. 12 lessons, okay? And that's what she began teaching, were these 12 lessons. And this was in the 1800s, okay? Mid-late 1800s in there. So $50. She was getting $50. That's an enormous amount of money at that particular time. Students were expected to practice daily between classes and fill their minds with the ideas being presented in order to shift their mental framework and develop healing power. In 1889, Hopkins found her stride. She had opened a seminary. She was teaching these basic classes. She was doing Bible study. She was doing all of these things. But also, here's another great thing, is so much of this was run by women. Now, I didn't know this until all of these things that I've discovered in the last week. That before the Civil War, this is what this person said anyhow. Before the Civil War, the teachers in schools were all men. It wasn't until the Civil War that women began being able to be teachers because the men were all off at war. And at that time, they could only be single women. You could not be married woman and teach. You had to be a single woman in order to be a teacher. So, Civil War, Emma Curtis Hopkins was a teacher. Once she got married, they fired her, and she couldn't work as a teacher anymore. And so she was able to become a spiritual teacher through Christian Science, because this had nothing to do with, regular school. And so much of this was run by women. And this was at a time when it was very unusual for women to be able to have careers. But it was like, it reminded me of Avon, where it was started for women to be able to be entrepreneurs and make their own money and do their own thing and be independent. And that's what a lot of this new thought were women who were able to teach. So here's what she did. I love this. She was so fucking smart and so tuned into the cosmic. In 1893, when the World's Fair came to Chicago, Hopkins made a radical decision. Rather than competing with Mary Baker Eddy's Christian Science in the World's Parliament of Religion Pavilion, she presented the Hopkins Association, whose branches now numbered in the hundreds, in the Women's Pavilion. Their booth presented Hopkins' approach to healing as a way for women to care for themselves and their families and to have an income stream of their own, which was still a radical idea in that day and age. So, all of these fabulous free-thinking women, and we're going to get to Florence Scovel Shinn and all of these people. By June of that year, according to college records, 110 students had graduated and been ordained through her seminary, and more than 11,000 people had experienced the elimination of physical emotional distress through her treatments. That was the year that Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, founders of Unity in Kansas City, Missouri, completed the advanced course and launched the teaching aspect of their organization. Hopkins' studies of mystical writings took her into a deeper and deeper quiet. She became a true mystic and began to realize that focusing on communion with the divine was becoming her primary calling. Now, we will certainly be talking about being conscious union with God, right? The higher, that 3 and 4 kingdom of our diagram. In her final book, High Mysticism, she wrote that the mystical life calls us to own less and less and become less and less engaged in the world around us. Yet she continued to teach and serve as an administrator in the seminary, always affirming that the highest good was surrounding and sustaining her. Okay, among Hopkins' students during that time were New Yorkers Dr. Harriet Emily Cady and Florence Scovel Shinn. So Emily Cady, who wrote this book of this 12 lessons, also Florence Scovel Shinn, both of whom went on to teach and write foundation texts for New Thought movement. Cady's Lessons in Truth, that was her book, is fundamental for Unity students, and Shinn's The Game of Life and How to Play It is widely popular and considered essential reading for adult children of alcoholics. It is the 4th book in the Library of Hidden Knowledge. Those familiar with the 12-step program used in Alcoholics Anonymous and related addiction programs may wonder if there's a link to Hopkins' lessons, and in fact there is. Bill W., co-founder of AA, worked closely with a young man whose mother was secretary to Reverend Emmett Fox in New York City through the 1930s. Fox had studied with the Fillmores and was ordained by Nona Brooks of Divine Science, both of whom Hopkins had trained. Fox's Wednesday evening services, which filled Madison Square Garden, were often the after-meeting gathering place for that first group of AA members, and his book, Sermon on the Mount, is often called the Second Big Book. In 1918, the newly formed International New Thought Alliance elected Hopkins to the position of president. She attended the conference and presented the first version of High Mysticism, her final integration of the teachings and possibilities available to every individual willing to do the practice. While there, she met with many of her now famous former students, and encountered one young man named Ernest Holmes, who was interviewing every healer he could meet with. For no reason known, she refused his request for an interview. Okay, stay with me. In 1923, while visiting New York, Hopkins experienced a sudden heart ailment, which she described in a letter to Mabel Dodge Luhan as not so much an illness as God calling an end to a career. She spent most of that year and the next with her sister on the family farm near Connecticut. By the fall of 1924, however, she felt much better and returned to New York. Again, Ernest Holmes was in town on a lecture tour. So this is 6 or 7 years later. Ernest Holmes was in town on a lecture tour and requested an interview. This time she agreed, and he visited her at her hotel. Now I want to tell the story the way the woman who wrote this book, I saw her tell it in a video. So she said okay, she would see him when she was staying at a hotel. So he went at the appointed hour and knocked on her hotel room door, and she was dressed like head to toe, gloves, big hat, blah blah blah. You know, all this is, again, 1924, whatever. Even for the time, she was dressed not in the 1920s style, but like an 1880s style. And head to toe, all black. And said, come in to her hotel room. She sat on the bed, the edge of the bed. He sat on a chair. And she just started talking. And she talked for like an hour. And at the end of that hour, and I guess he was like furiously taking notes, at the end of that hour, or however long it was, he got up to leave, and she said, now come back tomorrow at the same time. And she taught him every day those 12 lessons, her 12 lessons. And at the end of that, he went home and wrote the first original copy of the Science of Mind textbook. Okay? So this is what I'm saying, is that every single Florence Scovel Shinn and Ernest Holmes and the Fillmores and every one of these people. Now, how this worked at that time. Because I'm really like, I want to give you how major this whole thing is this was long before, there was just endless, and it's all phony baloney anyhow, all these, accreditations and licensing things. So what would happen is that Emma Curtis Hopkins would give these 12 lessons to people like the Fillmores and all of these other people, and they would leave there and take those same lessons and just rewrite them in their own language. So, for instance, this book by Charles Fillmore, Christian Healing, is the exact same 12 lessons in his own words. Katie's Lessons in Truth is the same lessons in their own words, over and over and over again, because that was the idea. She wasn't like trying to hold on. She wasn't like Mary Baker Eddy saying, I'm holding this all to myself and I've copywritten it and you shouldn't use it and you have to come through my organization. They were all giving it and writing. So you look through all of these people and they all have these. This is why I'm saying how important these 12 fucking lessons are. And how they give us the whole formula of mysticism, manifestation, demonstration, all of these things, that each one of these organizations were teaching these 12 lessons in their own words, in their own way, and how that filtered down. But see, we're going to explain things now as we go through these 12 lessons, and it's not going to be hard, it's going to be easy, it's going to be fun. It's going to be things that you're familiar with, but there will be a greater understanding of affirmations and denials and all of these things, which are, explained more in depth in her original teaching here. Okay. So let me just read this as we get more towards the end here. Okay, I love this. Members of her association now called, and she died in her 80s or something like that. Members of her association, now called the High Watch Fellowship, were nearby, and as the story goes, one of them was reading some of Hopkins' favorite Bible passages to her as she took her last breath. So she was laying there, thank you, Joe, she was laying there in bed. Someone was reading to her, and she just passed through the veil. Beloved Emma, as her more recent students are apt to call her, had inspired thousands to live in a wonderful new way that's based on a totally different understanding of their own nature, as well as that of the world and divinity. Her followers felt it was important for the work to be made continually available. From the very first lesson in all her books and teachings, Hopkins encouraged students to see the logic of the idea that there can be no power except good anywhere, including in ourselves. See, what I mentioned on Saturday and why I think this is important is she gives us the how, whereas Mary Baker Eddy and Joel Goldsmith won't give us any how to do this fucking thing. In fact, those of you who've been with me for a while and have listened to some of the oh gosh, wait a second. Hold on. Bitzer. Bitzer explains in one of those talks, the recordings, how Ernest Holmes came in and organized New Thought, but that was based on the organization of Emma Curtis Hopkins, because spirituality, New Thought was all very disorganized, and people were doing a million different things, and there was no real how, like, Joel Goldsmith's only how is meditate. But that's not even how he... Okay, let me tell you the Joel Goldsmith story about how he became a healer. The way that he became a healer is he went to see he was sick, and he went to see a Christian Science practitioner. And it was on a Saturday, and he went to the guy's office. He looked him up in the directory. He went to the guy's office, and the guy said, I don't see clients on Saturdays. On Saturdays, I spend the whole day just in prayer and really working on my consciousness. He might have even been fasting, but he was like, fasting and praying on Saturdays in my office, in God consciousness, to be a clear channel to do healing work. And Joel said, well, you're not going to turn me away seeing what condition I'm in. So he was very, very sick. And the guy said, okay. So he brought him in, and Joel had, like, not just a healing of the illness with the flu or whatever that he had. It completely, this guy basically, what in the Eastern traditions they would talk about, like, it was a transfer, right? It was like, when people talk about, like, oh, you have to learn Reiki from a Reiki master because they will transfer, or your guru transfers to the... Well, that was basically what happened with Joel, was because Joel said, when I left that office, I was no longer able to smoke, I was no longer able to drink alcohol, I was no longer able to gamble. It had just been erased, and none of those things, we didn't talk about those, there was nothing, but and from that moment on, people started coming to Joel, even though Joel was still in the import-export business, people started coming to him for healing. Virtual strangers would come up to him and say, if you would pray for me, I would be healed. So Joel never studied healing or knew. That's why his books don't give you any fucking information about how to do anything. He just says meditate. But he didn't heal through meditation. He healed from a transfer of consciousness. Okay? He sat in the presence of the Shakti of this practitioner. Because Joel was open and had been seeking for God for some time, he wasn't open to the Tao. The Tao flowed in, and the gift that was given was healing. So Joel's useless in describing how you do any of this fucking stuff. Mary Baker Eddy was useless in fucking telling you how to do any of this stuff. I talked on Saturday about how Quimby was useful, except it's hard to... Like, you can read the Quimby manuscripts, but they're almost indecipherable because they're not organized in any particular way. But again, he just badgered people into being well by telling them, how could you possibly be sick? There's only God, and God's will is only good. And so illness is a hallucination. And so let's read how Mary Baker Eddy took that to become the Christian Science statement of being, which is this. I posted this first. There is no life, truth, intelligence, nor substance in matter. All is infinite mind in its infinite manifestation, for God is all in all. Spirit is immortal truth. Matter is mortal error. Spirit is the real and eternal. Matter is the unreal and temporal. Spirit is God and man in his image and likeness. Therefore, man is not material. He is spiritual. Now, let's not kid ourselves. Helen Schucman knew Christian Science, and that's why so much of A Course in Miracles reads exactly like Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, which says there's no illness, there's no body, there's no physical, it's all illusion, it's all hallucination. The only thing that's real is spirit, God. Everything else is unreal and has no effect. These are all saying the same fucking thing, okay? This is all coming to the same basic thing over and over and over again. I get so excited about this. So, what Emma Curtis Hopkins did, and then her followers did, was teach the method. What's the method of bringing our minds back to sanity, back to center, back to truth over and over and over again? And the primary first thing is first cause, which is God is. God is. This is also goes right in alignment with Helen Schucman in one of the visions that she had early on before she actually started describing the Course, where she had this vision of this scroll. And in fact, there's a video of this on YouTube that you can find of this vision. But in the center of the scroll were just the two words, God is. If you unrolled it to the left, you could see the past. If you unrolled it to the right, you could see the future. She was like, no, I'm not interested in psychic stuff like that. I just am interested in this part right here, God is. And that was when the voice said, you passed this time. You don't need any of that psychic nonsense about the future and the past. You don't need to see your past lives. You don't need to have predictions about the future. All you need to know is God is. And that is everything, right? It's fascinating, right, Ali? It's like, it's so good. It's so juicy. It's so fabulous. So, so that's the foundation, right? God is. There is nothing but God. God is the one and only reality. Reality with a capital R. You'll see that even in A Course in Miracles, where it says reality with a capital R, which is there is only the absolute. The duality is part of the illusion. It's part of the relative. It's part of the experience here, which is fine. This experience here is absolutely fine. It's not bad. It's not evil. It's not horrible. But it is an effect. It is not a cause. It is an effect. So that's what Mary Baker Eddy means when she says, this is why I say, this is why Abraham says, the body has no volition. The body has no volition. This is why I made that meme years ago that says consciousness animates matter. Matter is the effect of consciousness. That's everything. Everything that we see in the physical is an effect of consciousness. So all our work is consciousness, consciousness, consciousness. Oh, this book. I made my own cover because the cover was so hideously ugly. But this is the last book that Raymond Charles Barker wrote, which was on healing. And I've told you, I'm fascinated now with healing, especially knowing that the only thing that needs healing is the mind. So this book is called Spiritual Healing for Today. It's the last book that Raymond... Okay, and I learned so much of this stuff just in the last fucking week after 40 years of being in this. So Raymond Charles Barker was one of my all-time favorites. Lived in Palm Springs the last part of his life. After he retired from the big religious science church in New York, he moved to basically Rancho Mirage, Palm Desert area. He was very good friends with Tom Costa, who started the beautiful religious science church Center for Spiritual Living that's in Palm Desert. And both gay dudes, okay? Raymond Charles Barker was certainly gay, and Tom Costa absolutely was gay. So they were good friends. So Raymond Charles Barker moved there, and he spoke at that church. Because I didn't know that. I thought that when Raymond Charles Barker retired, that was it. He moved to Palm Desert and he didn't teach anymore. But he actually taught at that church. And I didn't know this until the other day. Let me just read some of this. I'm getting ahead of myself because I get so excited. Okay. 13 days before Dr. Barker's passing on the 26th of January 1988, he and I, this is from the publisher, he and I tied up loose ends of this, his first book in 15 years, and so unexpectedly, his last. He had had it in mind for more than a year, and I was privileged to work with him in putting it together, continuing a collaboration that had begun with the reissue of his You Are Invisible and that had gone forward with the collected essays of Raymond Charles Barker. More than a decade earlier, I had been fortunate enough to study under Dr. Barker in what was his last 2-year course in the science of mind. Now, I have the recordings of that, which I posted a couple of years ago, of his live classes, weekly classes of teaching Science of Mind 1. Fabulous, so fabulous. Which he had founded in 1946 at the behest of his teacher Ernest Holmes. Upon his retirement in 1979, he moved to the California desert community of Rancho Mirage and established ties with DeVore Publishing, bringing out the first paper cover edition of his very popular Science of Successful Living. When a few years later I too settled in Southern California, our paths once more crossed, and I had the opportunity of working with him on his books. Spiritual Healing for Today reflects what I believe was Dr. Barker's growing concern with the current state of the healing ministry in the New Thought movement. A concern, because all of this was based on healing, and then it was tossed away. You don't hear about religious science and healing. You don't hear about unity and healing. They very rarely talk about healing, and you certainly don't hear about, I went and had a healing. They just fucking dropped it like a fucking stone. Now, if you're at one of those churches, people will start talking bullshit about, you should have acupuncture, you should try my doctor, you should try this medicine, you should try such and such. They'll talk to you about healing. Okay? So Dr. Barker was like, what the fuck's going on? This whole movement was founded on healing and we've dropped healing? What the fuck's going on? A concern that he pointedly voiced in his past president's address to the 71st Annual International New Thought Alliance Congress in Houston in July of 1986, and one that the reader can see for himself in his preface to this book. We are fortunate, I feel, to have this basic healing manual from him, and there is something unusually fitting in its being his last literary testament. Dr. Barker's departure was sudden, as he had always wanted it to be, and it seemed almost cruelly to remove him from our midst, those of us who one who embodies his teaching with very great grace, a delightful wit, and incredible consistency. Richard Collins has said it for many of us. He was absolutely true to his principles. In that regard, he was a rock. I believe that was his greatness, that and the fact that his principle was truth. He is deeply missed, but we have his words, the wonderful memory of him, and his books, which will be serving new generations when we, his survivors, have followed him. However, we shall have some catching up to do. Looking ahead in 1967 to his transition from this sphere of activity, he said, I am not living just to go somewhere. I'm living to go everywhere. I want to go on, and I want to go on as expanded consciousness. Now, I didn't know this until last week. He was teaching an evening class at the Palm Desert Church on the day he died. So he would sit, I guess, and he was a big guy. He would sit and he would have at this stage, and he would have a little table in front of him, and he would just teach. And he taught his class that night, and he went to his home, and he passed quickly at not being sick, not anything, just boom, passed into the next realm, into the non-physical, just like that, teaching up to the very end. Now, that's for me. Okay, that's for me. So then I just want to read this opening to his book on healing, a word from Dr. Barker. Having been in the healing ministry of the metaphysical movement in America for 48 years, I feel I can write on the subject of healing with authority. Having been active in the New Thought movement since 1934, I knew many of what we call the old-timers, the prominent pioneers of the healing movement, such as Charles Fillmore, co-founder of the Unity movement, Nona Brooks, founder of the Divine Science movement, and Ernest Holmes, founder of the Religious Science movement. All of these fine teachers were So he was a Unity minister before he became a religious science minister, and he worked personally with Charles Fillmore. He'd talk about sitting at the feet of Charles Fillmore and learning Charles. And Charles Fillmore told me this, and he told me that. And then Ernest Holmes told me this and told me that. This book is composed of material I've written for the Creative Thought magazine, published by the Religious Science International organization with headquarters in San Diego. I would like to see a revival of spiritual healing based on the divine mind and its clear consciousness. I know from experience that this system of spiritual methods is complete within itself. However, it has often been and still is diluted by other factors used in the techniques of healing. I invite you to return with me to the original methods based on mind and mind alone. Which is not to say he had a doctor, he went to see doctors, it was not about that's wrong or anything like that, nothing about this is not Christian Science where, you don't go to doctors, you don't take medicine, you don't do this or you don't do that. It was not that at all, but it was first principle. Principle first and last, and whatever you're guided to do is absolutely fine. Then, yes, acupuncture, massage, medicine, all of that is absolutely fine. But we go first to principle, right? There's only one life, one God, one presence, outside of which is nothing. Therefore, disease is not real. Poverty is not real. These are all effects of mind. God is the one and only reality, the one and only truth. Let me just see here. I wanted to see here. Oh. And can I just tell you, okay, this, I'm so excited. What happened to me in this transformation, this shifting into this new era and really focusing on principle, and what are these lessons? What are the great lessons of all of the founders of this movement that have been watered down and changed and fucked up over the years? Is the freedom that came to me particularly over the weekend, was an absolute detachment from what others are choosing or experiencing. An absolute letting go of, I wish I could teach these people spiritual truth. I wish these people were making better decisions. I wish this wasn't happening in the world. I wish that wasn't happening in the world. I was able to completely release and say, everything is the result of consciousness. And it's not up to me to judge or correct what's going on, because everybody is having their own experience, most of it unconscious, not knowing that they're creating that experience. And who am I to even take that away from them? Their joy, there are lots of people who find tremendous joy in resistance, in fighting, in one of the things that I've noticed a lot lately. See, this is the difference too, is I notice now without judgment, but I notice how people use victim language in order to justify their creating drama and upset, and how that's just fine because that's their joy in life is believing I'm being attacked, my rights are being taken away from me, I'm da-da-da-da. Because even if it's factually true, it's not spiritually true. And even spiritual people who believe this stuff oftentimes still choose drama and choose victim language and choose all of that stuff and get into it. And I used to think, why are you doing that? I'm going to try and work hard to keep you awake and from doing that. And I have no interest in that anymore, because I'm like, well, that's fun. They're like partying in a way. It's like kids who are in the yard and they're playing war. It's like, I have no interest anymore in saying, you kids, stop playing war. Stop playing attack. Stop playing war. I'm like, they're going to play war. They want to play war. They want to play victim. They want to play perpetrator. They want to play all of those things. And that's fine. I only can control what I'm playing and what I want to choose and what I'm doing. I'm not trying to convince or sell it to anyone. Um, I retired from all of that. I retired from selling God, from selling peace, from selling joy, from selling wholeness, from selling help. I'm not selling that anymore. I'm just making it available. That's why I sent out that email. It's like, I'm not trying to convince anyone that they should be in the Mystic Protection Program. I'm just saying it's here for people who are attracted to that, which is, you know, a minuscule, tiny amount of people who are attracted to that kind of thing. You know, I as I'm posting these things, I posted something on today, and I was tempted to go back and say and call it a hashtag truth pillow, because I remember there's someone I haven't seen any of her stuff in years, but there was someone who was a supposedly spiritual kind of teacher who everything she did was truth bombs, truth bombs, truth bombs, and I'm like, the last fucking thing this world needs now is bombs. But spiritual people love war and bombs. They like their spirituality to be an attack on other people who aren't spiritual like they are. And I was like, I have no interest in that. But I also no longer think, well, she shouldn't be doing that. I'm just like, I have no interest in truth bomb. I want a nice truth pillow. The truth is comforting. Remember, the first thing we have entered into this with that recognition that the first step of healing is to the removal of fear. A nice truth pillow helps to remove fear. Fear of the future, fear of poverty, fear of sickness, fear of loneliness, fear of guns, fear of violence, fear of separate. I want a nice truth pillow. I don't know what anyone else likes. This is none of my fucking business with anybody else. But I'm interested in a nice truth pillow. But as I was saying at the beginning of this, the dissolution of these churches, to me, is the return to the original intention of so many of these great teachers that we're talking about, which was they just wanted to teach this stuff. And we're in that age now where that is happening, where teachers just popping up every 5 seconds. There's somebody who's a teacher now, because in church, in the New Thought churches, there's control there. So they supposedly control what you're teaching, and you have to stick to this and da-da-da-da-da. And there was some value in that, but there's also, then you get into all the fucked up hierarchy and damage of all of that kind of thing, and power struggles and ego and all that stuff. So yes, there's squillions of teachers now who are teaching nonsense and bullshit and watered down this and that. But who cares? That's the idea of freedom, that we all have free will. But just as Abraham says, it's like a well-stocked kitchen. So we get to choose and we get to discern. And you can, most of us have tasted a lot of this stuff and said, okay, don't like that, enjoy that, don't enjoy that. And we don't have to be against anything. This was one of the sort of famous Ernest Holmes quotes, show me a man who is for something and against nothing. I'm at the point now where there's so little that I'm against. I don't want to push against anything. There's nothing to push against. I want to read from the little flap. I take the covers off the hardcover books. I don't like them. But the flap of this Christian healing book had this quote from the book in it, from Charles Fillmore. Modern investigation of the character of the mind is taking away all the mysteries of Egyptian, Hindu, Hebrew, and many other religions and mystical systems of the past. The perfect man idea in God mind is known under various names in the many religious systems. The Krishna of the Hindu is the same as the Messiah of the Hebrews. All the great religions of the world are founded upon spiritual science, but not all of that science is understood by their followers. So this is what we're doing now, is moving into the place of greater understanding of what and why and how we do these things that we do with our treatments and with all of these things. I want to just read here for us here as we're getting ready to close. What are the 12 chapter themes for Emma Curtis Hopkins? Basically is the Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was God, and that's all there was the Word. Denials, affirmations, faith, works, understanding, inheritance, truth, holiness, forgiveness, wisdom, and free grace. Practically every book that Charles Fillmore wrote was just taking those 12, like he talked the 12 powers of men. Christian has the 12 chapters. There's just the 12, and it's related also to the 12 apostles, 12-step program, all of these 12 things. So we're going to just be moving into this Mystic Protection Program, this Academy of the Mystical Arts and Sciences, of greater understanding of these principles and how to use them, how simple they actually are. They're not complicated. Even all these books are not that big, and, it's really not that complicated. So that's what, to me, this new era is about. This next sort of phase of unfoldment is living in the world, but not being of the world. The understanding of God consciousness and how it is the cause of everything for the mystic. For the mystic mind, God, the one and only cause. I think that should be enough for now as sort of the introduction to. Thank you, Lisa. Isn't this fascinating? I just think the history of this is fascinating. How we see how it's all one. It's all basically the same. It comes from the same basic root system, and so, which is why, all of these books more or less say the same thing in different words. But having this foundation is so wonderful because there's so many people who are just at the level of their whole understanding of New Thought is just the secret, right? Just princes, palaces, and parking spaces, and I can think something. And then, after the first little while of manifesting stuff, it seems to stop working. It's like they've got a broken wand and they don't know why it's not working. And then all of these teachers are about, well, let me tell you why it's not working. But they don't know why it's not working either. So they just have the same basic thing because they don't know any of this stuff. They don't know any of this stuff. Most of the modern teachers don't know any of this stuff. They only know the very surface level of the law of attraction. They think that's what all New Thought is. It's just the law of attraction, okay? So we know there's a lot fucking more to it than that. But the lot more is not complicated. It's not complex. It's not confusing. It's very clear. It's very, very clear. So, all right. Let's do our closing, and away we go to enjoy and savor the day. So we close our eyes, take a deep breath. As we come together in gratitude and appreciation for one another and for this joining and for this wonderful merry band of mystics in the Mystic Protection Program. Knowing we are safe, not because we band together and the world is dangerous, but because we understand there is only one world that is real, the world of God consciousness, the world of spiritual truth, the world of divine love and infinite intelligence, in which we live and move and have our being. And that there is a divine presence which is not only within us, but it is in fact what we are. Guides us, leads us over and over again to the extent that we are willing to listen and follow. And so we offer ourselves, our hands, our feet, our voices, to be guided where to go, what to do, and what to say and to whom. Remembering now, as always, the way that we will know love and feel love is by this divine infinite love moving through us, to the world around us. For this we are thankful. So be it. So it is. Amen. Yes, it is a teaser for what is next. So I love you. I love you. I love you. Have a fabulous, wonderful rest of your day.